Hello, no mai, hoki mai. Welcome back to the final day of the Financial Services Council 2020 conference, Generations. I'm sure you've had a relaxing break following the calming tones of Jace Tapatu. Jace has such a story and an incredible vision for New Zealand and our younger generation. Be sure to practice his mindfulness techniques and maybe even the odd yoga pose on a regular basis to improve your own well-being. I have the pleasure of opening the final sessions of the FSC's 2020 conference. There is a choice between the final Generations session, focusing in on being better guardians, the second FinTech session of the day, which changes the focus from wealth tech to insurtech, the last of 4 insurance breakouts, which features Dr. Rob Young, and the third investment panel, discussing human versus digital in the advice space. Thank you again to our sponsors, ANZ and Partners Life, for their support of these sundowner sessions. Once again, in all sessions, there is the opportunity for Q&A, so please take note and enjoy. Mā te wā.
Kia ora tātou. Ko Russell Hutchinson taku ingoa ke Chatswood Consulting aho I mahi ana. No England, Scotland, aku tupuna, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, I'm Russell Hutchinson of Chatswood Consulting, and I welcome you to this session where we're going to be talking about embracing Kaitiakitanga in our workplace. And now I'm going to hand over to David, who will do an introduction. David, Tikao.
Kia ora, Russell. Ti hei mauri ora, e te atua no te karoria, te hui a tāta tonu e tu nei. Tēnā koe, te papa I waho nei, tēnā koe. Te mana whenua o tēnei rohe, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora, Russell.
Kia ora, David. And so the FSC had several thoughts when contemplating a session of bringing a Kaitiakitanga perspective into governance. And I guess first of those was that because governance is an overarching theme for us as financial services organisations in delivering good outcomes to consumers. And so that's a part of our conduct infrastructure, and it's going to be a bigger theme as we go forward. Secondly, because we're being asked increasingly to consider multi-generational impacts, whether that's in lending for homes or leaving a legacy in life, or perhaps insurance, or building up family assets, or how we manage our money to transition the economy away from carbon. And because the industry, thirdly, because the industry has not only perhaps a governance deficit in some quarters, but also a diversity deficit, which was somewhat highlighted by the fact that I'm here acting as a facilitator. And so it's important that I turn this session over quickly to our panel. So I'm going to ask each speaker in turn to introduce themselves and give us a bit of their background, and then we're going to get into the subject that we have at hand. First of all, I'd like to introduce Camilla Tumai. Would you like to give us some background, please?
Yeah, kia ora everyone. Look, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, mother of 3 young adults. Actually 2 of my eldest have just moved out of home recently. I've been working in the financial services sector for the last 20 years, and I founded IKONIK because I wanted to make a generational impact, and that was about 6 years ago. I've always been passionate about financial education, home ownership, and especially helping our vulnerable clients within the community. And as a business, we've been doing that by running our educational programs within the home, also within the workplace, and just something that I really enjoy, especially specifically in the area of KiwiSaver, which is our pathway to home ownership.
Fantastic, thank you. David, thank you for your introduction earlier. Would you like to give us some of your background, please?
Kia ora anō, Russell, ko Ngā tahu takuiwi, ko Irikehu me Ngāti Wheki taku hapu, ko Rapaki me Onoku taku marae, ko Tikao te whānau, ko David Tikao toko ingoa. Kia ora anō, I am the Executive Director at Rawa. We're an investment scheme, a managed investment scheme based out of the Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu office in Christchurch. We've got around 30,000 members in our scheme now, and just ticked over recently $100 million in our 3 socially responsible investment funds.
Nice. Okay.
Kia ora.
And that's the last of our panel, please. Peter Lee, would you like to give us some background?
Tēnā koutou, ko Ngāti Pākua, toko ingoa, ko Peter Lee, toko ingoa, ko Tamaki Makaro Ako. Tēnā koutou. Greetings. My day job, if you want to call it that, is I'm founder and principal of C2C Partners. Started off as a financial planning firm. We're very much now in the ethical and sustainable investment advice side of things. It's interesting in that we have wound up doing a lot of work in terms of, I guess, inheritances and clients who are planning for multi-generations. We've got quite a number of clients who are aged over 80, and of course that's one of the things they're thinking about doing. But in particular, the clients that have got an inheritance, they just seem to think about, what do we want to do with our money? How's it going to benefit the world or whatever? My night job, as I sometimes call it, is I'm treasurer of a big conservation group, the Supporters of Territory Matangi, off the coast of, northeast coast of Auckland. And that's something I've been passionately involved with for about 30 years. I go over there and guide on a regular basis, go and volunteer as well as doing my treasurer sort of work. So those two tend to occupy a fair bit of my time, and the sort of interplay between those two is I'll draw out a bit as we go through today.
Fantastic. Now, David Tikao, I'm going to turn to you first, and I'm going to ask you if you can tell us a bit about the way Ngāi Tahu is working with its people to develop engagement, and what you're doing there at the Whai Trust.
Kia ora, Russell. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we've got about 30,000 members in our scheme. Our tribal average age is around 25, so we've got quite a young population that we really need to look after, you know, not just across the financial aspects, but across their well-being as a whole. So our managed investment scheme has around 8,000 tamariki members, and over the years we've found that, you know, we've tried to design a different statement that they receive that's more tamariki and kid friendly, and you know that's helped, and it's helped to guide the kōrero with them as well. But we wanted to do a little bit more. So over recent times, the last year and a half, we've also introduced another aspect to the scheme, and that's been something we've called Ngā Kaitiaki Moni, so the money guardians, or our money guardians. And that's really allowing us to have a kōrero and a conversation with our child members, not just about finances, but really about goal setting and achievements. And we want that to really forge and really help guide them up until they become the adult member of their part of the scheme, so that by the time they get to that age, they've already built up some trust with us and built up the conversation with us, Russell. We're really proud of what it's actually doing and how it's evolving at the moment.
That is fascinating. 8,000 tamariki involved,
yeah.
And you're sending statements directly to them.
Yeah, so they all receive a statement. That's our cohort. About 10% so far have taken up the Ngā Kaitiaki Moni part of the scheme, and that's our kids club. So you know, we're really encouraging them to be more active with their finances, more active with their part of the scheme, so that by the time they get to be that adult member, it's nothing new to them, and they've already built up that relationship with us.
Right. So that's money that's being saved for them, that they're getting some reporting on, and then you're nurturing some engagement around that.
Yeah, and you could also argue that they have the best deal from the tribe as well. So we have a match saving element that our members receive. Our child members, tamariki members, receive a $4 to $1 match saving on an annual basis. So if one of our child members was to have $50 paid into their part of their account, then Tinunanga or Ngāi Tahu will meet that $50 with another $200. So
Wow.
their $50 can turn into $250 over the course of a year.
That is the best deal, right? Yeah. Particularly valuable in a very low interest rate environment.
Yeah.
One of the questions I had is, like, I mean, obviously you've got quite a large number of members. You've got quite a young age group, or, you know, right across those members. What's been the challenges in terms of getting that engagement? How do you get them enrolled and participating?
Yeah, we've had over the years, so the scheme's been running for around 15 odd years, and we've had quite an organic growth from setting that up at the very start in 2006 under the old Securities Act legislation, and we've had quite a small team wrapped around that as well. And you know, we are a community that's tied through whakapapa, so although half of our tribe live in our tribal boundaries, the other half live outside of the tribal boundary, and so we still have some challenges in order to kōrero with our members wherever they're based, and that's internationally as well. So yeah, that aspect of it, Russell, has been one of the challenges. Plus, you know, just having a small team that's been focused on the membership services has also been a bit of a challenge, but you know, we're really proud that you know, almost 30,000 members in the whole of the Whairoa scheme now, and we want obviously to have more.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. That is literally the intergenerational dimension working right there. That savings for the kids and then learning about how to look after that. A last question on that scheme: what does good look like to you? What are your next sets of goals for that?
That's a great question, and one that we continue to fine tune as we go through. And an example of that has been that in February this year we introduced additional funds, where previously the scheme ran in the very start as a cash fund, and then it moved into conservative and stayed in the conservative fund up until February this year, when we introduced a balanced and a growth fund as well. So all those little milestones that we've had to go through to future-proof the scheme have been just attritional changes to the scheme. In October last year, the funds moved out of the old interest rate setting or the old superannuation style of returns into a unitised fund. So that was quite a big project for us to get over the line as well, and really bring our scheme up to date with the regime of a KiwiSaver perhaps, and also using that language that members already know through their KiwiSavers. So those are the kinds of things that we've had to do in order to progress the scheme. It hasn't happened easily. It's been, you know, those sorts of things have a very wide team wrapped around them, including our lawyers and investment manager and supervisor. So those are the kinds of things that we've had to do in order to really help our members understand not just why they're in the scheme, but bring them something that they can really relate to and understand. Yeah,
look, I know I said that was going to be my last question, but I can't resist because of what you said. That must be like, so that change must have come kind of just in the nick of time, really, because of course now we're in an environment where, you know, fixed interest doesn't really cut it for a long term, and we need to contemplate growth assets because of a very, very low interest rate environment. Is that a difficult story to tell? You know, thinking about how we've got to sort of take people on the journey to say, yes, we are looking after your best interests, even though it perhaps entails taking more risk. Is that a difficult journey to go on with your members?
Yeah, in some ways it is, and as you as we are all stepping into the new Financial Services Amendment Legislation Act, you know, that those sorts of changes are going to be every day. So it's been interesting, and it will continue to be so. The post-COVID environment, you know, we introduced those new funds in the middle of February, so we were right on the cusp of encouraging people to really have a look at their own appetite for risk, and all of a sudden it became a much wider story to be able to, or pānui to be able to communicate to members. But we had some really good support. We've got a fantastic board that provides good guidance to us. We've got a great legal team and investment manager that all help to really bring all of this together. And it also meant, COVID and that lockdown period was just the opportunity to get out and really help our or not get out literally, but to make our communications more regular and more succinct and really assist our members. And I think, the regulator and the supervisor were a big part of that.
Mm. Well, I hope we get to hear more about that fantastic board more as we go through the session. Now I'm going to turn to Peter Lee of C2C, who also has some background in the Turi Matangi Trust. What can you tell us about your experience in terms of applying these kaitiaki principles to your work?
I guess from the business perspective, it's a journey like I think most people have gone on. When I set up the firm 6 years ago, our focus was on the investment advice. The ethical and sustainable investment side was as an offering on the side. 2 years ago, it became something we decided that we do as our default setting for a couple of reasons. But one of them is that we realised that our role as advisors isn't just to say to somebody who wants to invest for long term, here's the best investment or the best return, or even here's a really ethical investment. It had to be financially sustainable, which meant it also had to be low cost. So that's been a journey in us going through with our clients and ourselves, thinking how do we actually combine all that? And so over time, we're seeing the emergence of more and more funds that have allowed us to do that side of things. And then probably the next stage in the journey we've got to is to recognise what's become the big trend or the big issue for most people, which is around climate change and avoiding fossil fuels. And what we've got to, we've found with quite a lot of our clients, particularly the ones who are really looking at the long term, is that they take the stuff around avoiding tobacco and gambling as a given. They accept you're going to do that anyway. They just want to know, what are you going to do to make this planet a better place over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years or whatever. So for us as a practice, it's been how do we respond to that? How do we treasure their goals, their views, their visions or whatever? So for us, it's been doing a heap of work in that sort of space, making sure as a firm, we are consistent with our values, that what we talk to our clients about, we're actually following the same things. The territory side has been interesting too, in that obviously when COVID came through this year, that had a big impact on lots of organisations. For us as a not-for-profit, half our revenue came from things like a shop we ran on the island, guiding trips that we did, even memberships or whatever. We saw overnight half our revenue disappear. So the interesting thing we faced as a committee is we thought, well, what do we do with this? Do we make staff redundant? Do we cut back on our projects or whatever? And I guess through that, one of the things I realised is that there's actually 3 levels of Kaitiakitanga. The first is the obvious one, the financial side, and we probably as an industry, we do this, we take it for granted. The wise use, treasury the money and so on. There's also for us, there was a second level called the operational side. So it's saying we've done work over the years, we spend $25,000 a year on a weekly program. If we stopped it for 2 years, that could have a big long-term impact. We could undo a lot of the good we've done in the past. So that sense of installed mass that we need to commit to. But there's probably a third, and probably the most important bit, and that is, most of you've probably been involved in not-for-profits. This is a strong sense of values and you want to make a difference. It's almost like a spiritual side of things. You're really honouring and treasuring dreams. So for us, we decided that was almost like the biggest bit of all, that we were stewards of our members' dreams. And even if we wanted to, if we had to, we really had to keep faith in everything they've done, now hundreds of volunteers and so on over time, just to keep the vision going, to say, yeah, we're willing to do a loss. We'd been careful enough to have money set aside so we could fund it for a couple of years, but to sort of treasure their hopes and treasure their dreams. And for me personally, and both through that and also through work, that's probably one of the biggest things I've picked up this year, is just how many people put faith in us individually, our respective firms and what we do, and they want us to succeed and thrive because we're part of their future and will be so for decades.
Nice, yeah. That phrase that you use, treasuring their hopes and dreams, and I noticed that you've used that both in talking about your clients in your financial planning practice and in talking about the your organisation, the members and the people that come and visit Tere Matangi, and how do you engage with people to identify those things? Perhaps of both kinds. I'm intrigued because obviously, like you say, as a director, you need to understand what those things are so that you can treasure them.
It's interesting at work. Our starting point with our clients is actually, funny enough, not about money. The very first question we always ask our clients is, "What's important to you about money?" And we always say it's not that money is necessarily important, but what does it represent to you? And that generally starts a whole process of them talking about, what they can do, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and so on. And the very next question is around what their accomplishments have been, and we say define it any way you like, personal, professional, whatever. What would you like them to be? So the very first two questions really set us up for going on this whole process of discovery. In fact, we call it a discovery meeting, to find out from our clients really what drives them, what's important, who's important, what they want to achieve out of the process. And I guess for us, and as we found for most people, the money side is almost, oh, by the way, and when we get to the end of the process from that side. For not-for-profits, it's generally easier in that there's usually been a common cause or theme that's caused people to get together. In our case, it's been around conservation. That's generally why people have got involved. But interestingly enough, once we've realised and we've gone through the obvious things they might want to help save birds or plant trees or whatever, there's really a couple of other areas that we realise they actually find really interesting. And one is around inspiration. That sense that they join partly because they get fulfillment, but also they want to be inspired to do things in their own backyard. Mm-hmm. And for us, it's one of the four outcomes that we actually want to achieve. We've got the conservation side. We do research, so we call that insight. We allow them to participate, and for us, that's a really, really important. But how do we get all sorts of people of whatever age, whatever abilities to be part of this journey that we're on? And then how do we inspire them so they can do their own things in their own patch, whether it's locally or increasingly internationally? And so it's creating opportunities for them to do that.
I'm intrigued with that engagement. I mean, that's really a common theme from what David was talking about in terms of seeking member engagement and being able to have a good story that is ongoing with them, and that they're keen to participate in, and likewise with your customers, and then also with your volunteers. And it struck me while you were talking that engagement was about something bigger than just them. Whether it was about their children or it was about the future. So I'm interested in how you, and in the kinds of things you hear from them about a vision bigger than them. Perhaps in that something that will outlast them.
I guess, it starts by, I love sometimes call it being ambitious for others. You take your ego out of the room and you say, what is it that others want to say? And being willing to actually sit and listen and actually shut up. It's really hard. I don't know how the rest of you find it, but it's actually really hard when you are a professional not to spout forth in whatever context, for-profit, not-for-profit, or whatever, to ask a question and then shut up. And in many ways, that chance to have people then talk and us, for whatever role we play, listening without prejudice is a really important part. I guess the second bit is actively looking for ways to involve people, saying, how can you be a part of the process? At work, one of our three core values is around partnership. And part of that partnership is with our clients. We say, we're walking on a journey with you. We're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to follow exactly what you tell us. It's a partnership. We're working together. And we will challenge each other. So that becomes an important part. And a not-for-profit side, that becomes really important because in the end, virtually without exception, every single person involved in not-for-profit is a volunteer. They can walk away tomorrow. You can't command and control. You can't even do that in for-profits really anymore, but particularly not-for-profits. So if you can't command and control, you have to find other ways to listen, involve, influence, recognise, change, modify what you do. A lot of that, I guess, for us, we've found too, has come from everyone. When we talk a lot about stories increasingly, I think of it as a genealogy, a whakapapa. All organisations have got them. Every business was started by somebody with a vision. And I guess what I've picked up too, particularly from the not-for-profit, is if you talk about that, it's amazing how people then get involved. They buy into why the organisation started. That also becomes part of the future as well.
That's fantastic. I hope we'll hear a little bit more about that engagement as we go through the session. Yeah, it's intriguing to hear about the similarities of engagement from quite different organisations. Camilla, we're going to go to you next. Camilla, you run IKONIK Financial Services, and so you're also a successful practitioner in the financial services sector. And I know that you've been responsible for bringing financial advice to thousands of customers. And when we spoke about preparing for this session, you spoke passionately about the lack of diversity in the advisor space in particular, and also what that means for the groups of customers that you've been focused on who are probably underserved. So I'd love to hear you tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, look, I think that we have so many barriers to overcome if we're going to make a real difference. And, you know, they are barriers, for example, you know, how do we make it easier for vulnerable clients to access financial education? We've got cultural barriers, you know, yes, around the lack of diversity in our advisor space, the generational barriers as well. You know, I remember in the first lockdown, I rounded up my daughters, one who pretty much finished college partway through this year, gone to uni, and the other one had finished college last year. And, you know, they both went to low decile colleges, and I can hand on heart say that 80 to 90% of all of their friends were either Māori or Pacific Island students where their parents didn't own their own homes. And I think, you know, with the generational issues that we have, it's very hard if you live in a family with parents that don't own their own home, and they don't really understand, you know, even just simple things about, you know, what's possible for them, money, how they can get into their first home, lots of those sorts of things. You know, what does that do for their children? Because their children, the parents can't exactly be you know, role models for their children if they haven't been able to do it for themselves. And it's not necessarily because of anything that they have done wrong. A lot of it is to do with lack of education. And so we ran a webinar. Actually, we ran quite a few webinars during the lockdown, but one of them specifically, my favorite one, I actually had my two daughters in on that session, and we rounded up so many students, so many of my friends that had teenage daughters, and you know, that was just a little way of trying to make a small difference, because sometimes it's really hard to get into the home in the first place, but sometimes we have to go through the children and educate the younger generation first in order for us to even be able to get into the home. And then when we talk about diversity and cultural barriers, you know, not everyone is receptive to having somebody come into their home. Trust is important. That personal connection is important. So one of the things I've definitely seen in my time in this industry, and probably struggled with, is that it's been really challenging to basically entice more Māori and Pacific Islanders into our space, the advisor space. And I think there's a massive need for it, because you know, so many of our people don't have easy access to financial education, or, you know, are struggling or haven't bought their first home. And in so many ways, they're more likely to sit down or listen, or, you know, take time to be educated with somebody that they have a personal connection with. And sometimes that could just be someone that can either speak their language or can explain things to them in a simple way that they can understand, or it could be someone that understands their cultural needs. So I really do think that you know, if we're going to make a real difference in this industry, we've got to be able to overcome some of these barriers. I remember it was, you know, in the last year, went to one of these big sessions where there were 500 odd advisors all in the same room at Eden Park. And it was, you know, I looked around in that room and I was one of the speakers there, and my heart dropped, and I thought to myself, you know, wow, spot the Māori and Pacific Islanders in the room today, because I can tell you there were not many. And there's also not many that are running advisor businesses. So it's a big challenge to try and, you know, get more of us into this industry. I'd love to be able to work a lot closer with, you know, organizations or even big corporates that are willing to, you know, to support and help fund and create a career pathway to bring more of our Māori and Polynesian people into this industry. So yeah, that's my take on that.
There were so many things in there. One of the things that struck me is sort of a little bit, you mentioned, you know, you mentioned talking about the expectations, you know, and how difficult it is to shift those expectations. If one generation hasn't, then how are the kids going to kind of see those as a possibility? But the really exciting thing was about that was how you kind of inverted that, and by reaching the children, you were then able to reach the, you know, reach the parents, which I thought was, you know, absolutely fascinating. It's almost like when I was thinking about the subject, I was thinking about that intergenerational, you know, preserving things for the future and so on. Right? That, you know, that interplay struck me as fascinating. But one of the other things that you mentioned on the way through was this issue about also about recruitment and bringing people into the sector. And I know that you've had a go at doing some of that, and you've tried some of those things. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've tried and what you found, and how that has or hasn't worked?
Look, there's so many different challenges that come with recruitment, let alone our industry, especially because how advisors are remunerated. And so I think for anyone that's been a financial advisor operating in the industry for a while will know that the longer you're in, the easier it gets. But there's that sort of, you know, first 12 months, 2 years that can be quite challenging. And, you know, a large number of advisors are remunerated via commission, not salary. So first thing is, it's always been a challenge to bring, you know, let's say Māori Pacific Island advisors into the industry, because they don't even apply for the role to start off with. So that's a challenge in itself. And yeah, very, very few do. And I think that those that do are probably the ones that I've seen over the years are potentially ones that are just sort of applying for any role. And, you know, you get to a point where you want to help everyone, but it can be a little bit challenging. If there was you know, some sort of foundational program to help, you know, bring them in, and making sure that they're working with entities or businesses that have the right structure, support system, mentoring, so they have a chance of being successful, and then potentially, you know, being able to put them on salary, or just make that financial journey easier. I think it would be a lot better.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to remind our viewers that you have a button in whatever thing it is that you're watching us on, whether you're watching on the app or whether you're watching on your computer, and you can push that button and you can ask questions. So please feel free to pop questions through, and they'll appear on my phone and I'll be able to put them to our panel. But while you're thinking about what you'd like to ask about, then I've got a couple of things I'd like us to kick around if possible. It seems to me that our aspiration and ambition is a key factor, and it's a common theme amongst all of our panelists have mentioned it in some way, shape or form. And one of the questions that formed while Camilla was talking for me was, how do you foster, if I know sometimes we ask people, you know, what do you want? What are your hopes and dreams? But how do you help people have bigger dreams? And I'll just maybe I'll go to David, if you'd like to kick in.
That's a great question. Thank you, Russell. Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Because all of this is all connected, and you know our Māori model of health talks about 4Po, and you know the financial well-being is just one aspect of that. If you haven't got good finances, then you know you may not have a safe and warm place to live. So, they're very obviously connected, and that just shows you how imperative it is that we look to provide that support as best we can. So our $5 scheme does allow for a first home withdrawal. And, we know that most of our members that do come in, and we've had, we're kicking on towards 1,000 of our members have withdrawn for their first home. And that's a fantastic achievement and a fantastic milestone for us to get to as well when we do reach that shortly. But buying that first home is just one aspect of meeting somebody's aspirations. And that part of it does allow you to have, once you've got a home, to the Kiwi dream of building up that capital and starting towards the retirement dream, because traditionally we all know that investing for New Zealanders has been largely focused on home ownership.
And it's such an important foundation. I know that when we hear from the Retirement Commissioner, if you own your own home in retirement, you're going to be about sort of 2 or 3 income deciles better off than if you don't, obviously, because it means your superannuation is basically on top of having, already met all of those expenses. I'll open it up to Peter, but Camilla, David, do jump in as well. How do you help foster higher ambition? And perhaps maybe more amongst the volunteer groups who maybe don't know what's possible, that kind of part of your experience.
Well, I guess both sides, whether it's whether you're a volunteer, whether you're a consumer or a client of any of our firms, one of the things is we all lead busy lives. So that idea of creating space, creating room, time, or whatever, where people can actually think about these things is something. I mean, we do it if we have a meeting with clients, but pick out any volunteer place, someone goes somewhere, they have that time, it takes them away from their ordinary lives. They can actually think if they're asked, if they're in the right sort of space to do that. And the second part is really, I was told a while ago, it's one of the best things I ever learned. Asking great questions is just so important, not just the trivial ones, but just delving down. And a not-for-profit is basically finding out what is it that really drives somebody who's involved, engaged, what is it they really want to achieve, how do they see themselves contributing? And that also giving them the space, just listening and giving them that chance to talk. As I said before, that listen without prejudice aspect of actually finding out from them, maybe for the first time in their lives to think about that. I know as an industry, with something we probably take for granted, we're about the only industry and profession that really has that opportunity and works with people ongoing. I can't think of another profession that might talk to clients about 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years in the future. Maybe an architect if they have a client build a house. But we've got this wonderful opportunity and almost obligation. We're future focused almost by definition. And that's sort of rather cool. So if we can bring that, whoever we work with, and get them to lift their heads up from the day to day, give them that chance of opportunity, and we're doing them a real favour.
I'm excited about that too, and I wonder about that, how we sustain that conversation, especially when perhaps we had that conversation a while back, and then we have, quite often we've got sort of low engagement products. Maybe we've got small balances, we've got insurance products, or we've got a home loan in place, and they might be kind of the set and forget variety. So how do we keep that conversation going, even though there can be some pretty long gaps in that conversation, perhaps? Camilla?
Yeah, look, I think that's a challenging question, so I might let one of the others answer that. But I would like to say something about your previous question, because I think that, and it sort of relates a little bit to what we're doing in our business. Like, personal connection is really important, and that whole education process and getting the right messages out there. So for us, one of the key messages is, especially when we're dealing with families, you've got to be able to help yourself first before you can help others. And being a mum and being a parent, what parent or what mother doesn't want anything but the best for their children? And that whole thing about being a good role model, and making sure that you're in the right space first, so you can help and support your children to make really good decisions too, because a lot of the time they're looking at you. What's mum and dad doing? They're following in your footsteps. And you know, when we're working with companies, for us as a business, we've been creating this movement around creating opportunities for leaders within organizations to jump on board and be a part of this whole shift around creating this whole, you know, this financial literacy gap that currently exists in New Zealand is not something that I'm going to be able to, you know, shift on my own. It's going to take a team effort, and you know, it's really trying to get the right messages across when you're going into organizations and companies and leaders and saying, you know what, you hold the power in your hands to make a difference, and this is something that you can do for your people, and it's something that will really have a personal but significant impact on their lives. It creates loyalty as well, you know, when people feel appreciated. So I do think a lot of it is around communication, personal connection, delivering the right messages. And for me personally, I'm quite lucky in the sense that I often use my own personal journey. You know, I was a teenage mum. You know, I had my kids when I was a teenager, or two of them at least, and I dropped out of school early, no qualifications, landed this very, very basic job in the financial services industry, ringing up doctors asking for medical information. And you know, as time has gone on, a lot has changed and developed for me, and so sometimes it's really it's easy when I'm, you know, being able to connect, especially with our Māori and Pacific Island people, where they just think that, you know, there's no hope for them. There is hope, and I'm definitely proof of that hope. So yeah, again, it goes back to the messages.
Yeah, it seems like an interesting connection back even to Sinead Boucher's story. She said she was the first person in her family to get a degree. Yeah. And partly it was the encouragement of the people in the business around her that, you know, showed her that possibility and gave her those chances. But we've talked quite a lot about our connection to customers, and we're going to change gear a little bit now, and we're going to try and talk about this sort of longer term guardianship concept as it relates to our governance processes, our board processes, how we manage our businesses and so forth. And I know earlier on, David, you spoke about the fact that you have a fantastic board. So maybe you can you tell us a little bit about your board process and how that works?
Yeah, I can. So our boards are a part of our wider Te Runanga makeup. So we have a Te Runanga governance board with a representative from each of our Papatipu marae. So there's 18 of those, and our board at Whai Fund Limited report into the table of Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu to those 18 decision makers. Our tribal philosophy is mō tātou amo ka uri a muri ake nei, which translates into for us and our children after us. And that is really a key theme of this conference, and actually really does translate very well into all of the decision making that happens within that governance table is filtered down into the governance table at the Whai Fund Limited board, and then that's driven down into our operations team. So what are we doing on a daily basis in order to assist our members? And when you talked about aspirations, and Peter and Camilla have both talked about the way that we kōrero with our whānau and our communities, and that's really the driver. We talk to our communities, you know, and especially for Māori who aren't just talking about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, iwi talking in 200 and 400 years. You know, we're still going to be here. Our tribe are actually still going to be here. You know, our governance table will come and go, and our program delivery will come and go, but the tribe will still be here and our whānau will still be here. So how do we do the best thing possible so that our tamariki are going to go forward and be better off in the future than what they are today?
Yeah, no, that long-term dimension is such a huge, you know, that's where we know we've been here for a long time, we're going to be here for a long time. We better look after what's going on, you know. Speaking of looking after what's going on, Peter, do you want to reflect on that? How does governance process work at your work at Tiritiri?
We have a elected committee, which pretty much sets the bigger tone and structure and so on. Underneath that, there's a few subcommittees and so on. Interesting enough, the way we try to view it is rather than the main committee sitting on top of subcommittees and the members underneath, we're trying to do it the other way and essentially saying our role is really to support those above, so have an inverted pyramid, if you like. And one of the things, I guess, just reflecting particularly on what Camilla was saying earlier, is to me the biggest challenge that we've got both there, conservation is incredibly middle class. I don't know if you've ever been on any working projects, but it's a really middle class white thing sort of thing. So having diversity of views is really important. I see that there, I see that in our profession, really relate with what Camilla was saying before. And even, for example, as a firm, we're going to go down the full FAT approach. Governance is a really important part of that. How do we get diversity of views? These directors talks about that as a huge issue and opportunity, not just gender, not just ethnicity, but diversity of views that challenges. So that's that willingness, I guess, that we submit to or listen to others and take that on board, not as a token thing, but as an integral part of being better, richer, stronger. I don't really know what the answers are as a firm, and even from a tourist perspective, we're trying to work out how do we encourage diversity of views and so on. It's a really hard thing, nut to crack, that one.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about, so we're talking about governance, and you brought up diversity of views, and this is something that Camilla and I had to talk about when we were preparing for the session. Is there a governance deficit in, or a lack of diversity in our sector, Camilla, and what are you seeing there in terms of governance?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lack of diversity in our sector, and I pretty much mentioned that earlier, and I think it's in all parts of our sector. Yeah, absolutely, in all parts of our sector. I have, I guess with the 20 years experience in the industry, I've worked on the corporate side, I've ran an advisor business, I've contracted my services. I don't think it's just, cultural diversity. It's the same issue that we've had for the whole 20 years I've been in the industry, and it's changed a little bit, but not too much. And that is, also the lack of women, especially advisors in our industry. I think we make up less than a third. It's definitely I'm not so much part of the big boys club anymore like I used to when I first started off my journey as an advisor 16 years ago. But yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done in that space. You can see the shift, but the shift is slow, and the shift needs to be a little bit quicker if we're going to make some real traction and real change in that space.
Yeah, I know that we heard from the from the FMA and the Conduct and Culture Review. They're challenging the sector to improve governance, and I suppose the fact that culture is an integral part of that review is kind of a way of saying, hey, we think that there might be a problem in terms of how the industry connects with customer because the industry tends to think in a certain way. And it's kind of obvious, isn't it? You think, okay, managing money, it attracts a certain kind of a person, really, and so we tend to be, we tend to have a certain set of educational background skills, quite analytical, and quite numerate, even though an awful lot of our clients don't necessarily think that way. And of course, one of the other big issues that they talk about is trust. And of course, that's another one. It's difficult for us who have a particular way of thinking to be able to reach out and go, I have to trust that if I'm going to bring other people in to our governance process, that they're going to be, they're going to participate and I'm going to get some insight from them.
Yeah.
It's really difficult for us to see beyond our own kind of fishbowl. Sorry, Camilla, did you want to jump in?
I don't think that it's, you can actually pinpoint it and say, oh, it's the industry's fault that we don't have enough Māori or Pacific Islanders on boards, or we don't have enough of our people as advisors. It's I also think some of that comes back on us, and I'm definitely first to sort of admit that maybe it's a combination of a cultural thing, maybe it's a combination of being female, but more often than not, You know, sometimes we don't think that we're good enough to be in some of these certain roles, so we don't try. And I've seen that through, you know, certain cultures not applying for just being an advisor. So it's kind of like, how do we create a bit of a shift, and yeah, again, create a pathway to give more confidence, yeah, within certain cultures and ethnicities.
Yeah, yeah, and I suppose it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. Possibly if we have more diversity in our, you know, boards and executive leadership and so on, then people will be able to go, that could be me, you know, just like the story we heard from Sinead. Whereas if we don't, then we're always going to stay stuck. Cool. Okay. And just in terms of that, what are you seeing in terms of recruitment or diversity in terms of coming into the industry too, Peter?
I echo Camilla's sentiments. I think, you know, we as a practice actively been trying to find both younger advisors, female advisors, and so on. It's really difficult. I don't think it helps that the language that we use in the industry can be quite off-putting, and one word that springs to mind is the word budget. And I've been on record as saying, I don't...
How's that, Peter?
Sorry?
How's that?
Well, you know, we use the word budget, and budgets imply profit and loss, plus and minus, wins, losses. It's a zero-sum game type concept. And if thinking about it in terms of how people actually make decisions or how you want them to make decisions, I call it goals and guidelines. So typically I might say to clients, forget doing a budget, a really detailed one, because we know you won't stick to it. It's like going on a diet. You'll fall off, and then you'll think it's a terrible process, don't bother. But if you think, what am I trying to achieve? And what are some of the rules I can operate in? Within that, spend what you like. Now, I've used that philosophy myself for 20 years in managing teams and now with clients or whatever, to say, if what you do either helps you get to your goal or won't hinder you, go for it. We're in the job of helping, the business of helping people, you know, enjoy life. So, but the word budget, I think, if you're an 18, 19-year-old and you might look at our field and think, I want to be an advisor, oh, that means money, that means budgets or whatever. Is that necessarily the right concept? Whereas if we're talking about values or aspirations, or how do you enrich your life? What does that look like? How do you make wise decisions? That's a counselling role. That's a very different skill set. So possibly the way that we frame it in terms of our industry, our profession, the outside world, could be putting off the very people who'd really be great advisors and great people and great leaders.
Right. Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah. David, obviously, when you're engaging with young people, you are talking about money. But I've got a sense that you must be doing that in a different kind of a way. So, you know, how are you doing that? Especially, I've got this point around the community-based view that we want to bring in.
Yeah, we, I guess as a community, you know, we are pretty close to our whānau members, and yeah, we do still. A lot of us are still very connected to the marae, and so you know, we're in front of our whānau on a regular basis, and so, you know, when things are going well, then, you know, they get to hear it firsthand. That kanohi ki te kanohi, face-to-face engagement is really important for Māori, and so it's important for us as well that we do get out and about. We've had a roadshow that's been running for a number of years now, where we've gone to different parts of Aotearoa and Australia to get in front of our whānau, and that's been really successful to be able to deliver those messages, and, you know, for our whānau members to look us in the eye and you know, really find out more about the scheme and the delivery and the benefits. So not just hiding behind a PDS or product disclosure statement, so that you know, which our members are expected to read and digest. But just touching on other aspects there as well about that, we really think that over time, ngā kaitiaki moni is going to be a real significant part of our tribal members, our younger tribal members' journey into finance, and for them to be able to decode these messages, you know, somewhat subliminally as well in some ways, because we are building that relationship, we are building that trust, and helping them to really make those achievements that they can get something really, really good and rewarded, and that's going to help them to be able to decode the messages that are coming through in our industry.
Fantastic. We're just about running it out of time, but we're going to have time for a last round, if you like. So we've talked a bit about these principles, about connecting better with our customers, and understanding them better, being able to talk about aspirational messages, and then we've talked about that intergenerational dimension, and then we moved into the governance area. Now I know that there's kind of sort of those three bits of territory which we've covered. Looking at questions, basically, the common thread out of these is, well, what could I do, right? So there are just a couple of words, if you like, in terms of what could somebody who's perhaps running a financial services business, or either in the advisory side, or somebody who wants to create a better environment in one of the corporates that we work with, what could they do? Peter, would you like to go first? Thanks.
I guess I'd probably always start off with, always starts and finishes with values and embodying your organisation's values. And by that, I don't mean the usual ones people come up with, like truth, trust, teamwork. Those are hygiene factors. I'm thinking about higher aspirational ones, or ones that are really ambitious or hard to get. Whatever role someone's in, if they can embody their organisation's values, champion them, model and be a role model for them, that will radiate out from them and show that they're actually being true to what the organisation stands for into the future. Because it's values in the end that will cause somebody to deal with you or not deal with you.
Nice. Camilla, can we go to you next?
Yeah, look, 100% agree with what Peter's saying around values. Values are so important. And I think about one of our core values and conversations that we have in our team, all the time. It's all about how much you can give to somebody, how much of an impact you can make, how you can empower somebody through the power of education. Because if your intentions are to do all of that, then you're going to receive naturally in return. But clients, people can see when somebody is there for all the wrong reasons. They're trying to sell them something, so they're trying to push a product, and yeah, I just think that if you're living by your values and your focus is around giving and empowering others, then quite naturally you're going to create a lot of opportunity. And it's about how you choose to do that. And we heavily focus on trying to do that within the home and within the workplace. So that's probably all I can say about that.
Thanks. David, what are your tips?
So whether it's investing through a savings scheme like Whai or taking advice for your best position that you should be in for other investments like a KiwiSaver, whether it's setting up a program like Ngā Kaitiaki Moni, all of this stuff costs money and it's expensive. But on the other side of that is the cost of not doing it, the cost of not saving and putting away for the long-term compounding returns, the cost of not getting that advice to make sure that you're in the right fund, paying the right tax, the cost of actually not setting this stuff up and setting an example for our tamariki so that we can build that trust and build that relationship. So for me, it's about what the cost is and the opportunity cost is. You need to do this.
Fantastic. Okay, we need to do this, and that is a good note for us to conclude on. I think it's been fascinating to learn more about what you're doing in each of your different areas, and to understand a little bit more about how we can better employ these principles of guardianship or kaitiaki in financial services. And I look forward to us learning more about that and seen more of those diverse faces at our conferences, so that we can be more welcoming, and we can also, I think, as I noted when we started, that we were going to talk at least about a couple of things, and perhaps the diversity deficit and the governance deficit were two of those. But it did strike me especially when you were talking, Camilla, and well, in fact, all of our speakers, that there was perhaps a third thing going on there, which is that by not expanding our horizons, we're missing out on a segment of the community that should be dealing more with us, you know, and so we really want to welcome them in. So thank you all, Peter, David, Camilla. I was also reminded that if perhaps we were holding back in any way around sort of embracing this subject, then we should remember the phrase "let the brave leap" that Sinead reminded us of in her session, and so I should finish up by saying kia tupeke te toa, and thank you very much.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Russell.
Wow, what a range of insightful discussions there have been. I'm sure you had some difficulty choosing which session to attend, but then again, that's what's great about digital. They're all recorded and available to watch on demand at your leisure. There's no fear of missing out here. And so I guess that this brings the FSC conference to a final close. In a year full of uncertainty, adaptation, resilience, and agility, I think I can speak on behalf of the audience and say what a fabulous 3 days it has been. You have been an engaged, enthusiastic, and totally delightful audience, and we are very thankful that you have been here with us. I'm Yvonne Davey, Manager, Super and Savings, Craig's Investment Partners, and I have been your MC for day 3. I've thoroughly enjoyed sharing the show with you today. Thank you to the team here in the studio, and have a good night. E noho rā.